In a quiet cafe on his birthday, a lonely man sits unnoticed, his cupcake untouched. The silence is broken by a little girl's gentle question. "Is it your birthday, mister?" One innocent moment, about to change two lives forever. Jacob Reed checked his wristwatch for the third time that morning. 8:00 a.m. on the dot, just as it was every year on his birthday. The Cartier gleamed in the soft gray light that seeped through the frosted windows of the Willow Street Café, a modest spot on the edge of Chicago's business district. Outside, snow drifted lazily from the pewter sky, dusting the empty sidewalks and softening the city's morning edges. Inside, the café felt almost suspended in time. Only the steady whir of the espresso machine and the muted scrape of a barista's shoes across the tile gave proof of life. Jacob sat at his usual table in the far corner, where he could see the street without being seen. In front of him sat a single cupcake with a twisted blue candle, unlit, untouched. He didn't look at it. Instead, his gaze fixed on the snow outside, eyes blank, his reflection barely visible in the window. He picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts out of habit. Names, hundreds, maybe thousands, business partners, colleagues, the occasional Aunt May or Tommy tennis club. Not one unread message. No birthday wishes, not even a lazy auto-reply. The silence in his phone, that digital void, seemed almost louder than the soft jazz playing overhead. He tried to focus on the day ahead, contracts to sign, deals to close, but the emptiness pressed in, sharper than ever on a morning like this. He set his phone down with a sigh, shoulders stiff under the weight of a Tom Ford overcoat. His life was a study in contrasts, success measured in numbers, loneliness measured in hours. Jacob had everything, except someone to share this morning with. The cafe door swung open with a muted jingle. A gust of icy air chased in a woman and a little girl bundled in mismatched winter coats. The mother's face was drawn and pale, her hands red with cold, hair damp with melting snow. The little girl, maybe 6, maybe younger, clung to her mother's side. Her brown hair tucked under a faded pink knit hat, cheeks flushed with cold, but eyes wide with a kind of hope that the world hadn't yet battered out of her. They hesitated in the entryway, shaking snow from their boots. Jacob's eyes flickered over them, then back to his window. He tried to ignore the way the little girl's shoes left wet tracks on the floor, the way her thin coat gaped at the wrists. But the barista was busy, and the only free table was near his own. The mother approached quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, would it be all right if we sat for a few minutes? Just until we warm up?" Jacob almost said no. Almost. He was about to say he was expecting someone, or that he preferred to be alone. But he looked up and saw the exhaustion on the woman's face, the silent plea she tried to hide, and something in him stalled. He nodded, gesturing stiffly to the seat across from him. They sat, the little girl bouncing on her toes to reach the chair. For a few moments, the cafe's usual background noise, espresso hissing, quiet laughter from the kitchen, felt distant. Jacob's phone buzzed once, a calendar alert. He ignored it. The mother wrapped her arms around her daughter, rubbing her back. The little girl glanced at Jacob's cupcake, then at Jacob himself, curiosity mixing with caution. Jacob looked away, uncomfortable. He didn't like questions, especially from children. But then, clear as a bell in the hush, the little girl's voice cut through the room. "Is it your birthday, mister?" The words seemed to startle Jacob as much as a sudden thunderclap. He jerked slightly, as if someone had tapped him on the shoulder. For a heartbeat, the entire cafe fell silent. The hiss of milk frothing, the clink of dishes, even the city sounds from beyond the window, all faded away. All that remained was the little girl's question, echoing in the sudden stillness. Jacob blinked, unsure what to say. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in a very long time, someone really saw him. Not the CEO, not the suit. Just, Jacob, another human being on a cold winter morning. He opened his mouth, closed it again. He was used to buying silence or changing the subject. He was not used to being asked about his birthday by a stranger's child. He looked at the cupcake as if seeing it for the first time. The blue candle leaned slightly to one side. The frosting had started to melt at the edges. For a moment, he felt exposed, as if the little girl's gaze had peeled away every layer of success and left only the lonely truth beneath. He swallowed, throat tight. "Yes," he managed, voice quieter than he meant. "It is." The girl's eyes brightened, as if this was a secret only she could share. Jacob felt the unfamiliar prickle of emotion behind his eyes, a sting he hadn't let himself feel in years. The world, for just that instant, felt smaller and more tender, as if everything that mattered was right there at that little table. Then the noises of the cafe crept back in. The spell broke, but the feeling lingered, an ache in his chest he couldn't quite name. Jacob looked away, clearing his throat, trying to compose himself. He didn't know it yet, but the trajectory of his life had already begun to shift. Outside, the snow kept falling, gentle and relentless, as if trying to blanket the city in a second chance. Jacob sat rigidly, his posture as immaculate as his navy suit. But there was an unfamiliar tension in his chest he couldn't quite ignore. Across from him, the little girl swung her feet beneath the table, her eyes never leaving his cupcake. Her mother, Sarah, unzipped her worn coat and gently brushed melting snowflakes from the child's tangled hair. The cafe's warmth seemed to revive the faintest blush of color in their cheeks, but Jacob couldn't shake the sense that he was intruding on something fragile, some quiet, desperate hope that didn't belong in his carefully ordered world. He glanced at his watch again. 8:12. Less than an hour until his board meeting, the one day he never allowed himself to be late. His briefcase rested by his foot, a crocodile leather anchor to his old life. Every instinct told him to stand, to gather his things, to step back into the role he'd spent decades perfecting. But as he started to move, the little girl reached into her backpack and pulled out a sheet of folded paper, the edges soft from being carried too long. She held it out with both hands, earnest and unafraid. "I made this for you," she said softly, eyes shining with sincerity. "It's not much, but nobody should be alone on their birthday." Jacob hesitated, startled by the offering. No one had given him a handmade anything since he was a child. He took the card with stiff fingers, unfolding it slowly. On the inside, drawn with a blunt purple crayon, was a cupcake and 3 stick figures standing in a field of blue dots. Snow, he realized, and he was unmistakably the tallest figure, flanked by a woman with yellow hair and a little girl in a pink hat. For a moment, Jacob couldn't speak. The card felt impossibly heavy in his hands. He looked up at Sarah, whose gaze was steady and open. She wasn't embarrassed or apologetic, just quietly exhausted, trusting her daughter to reach out in the way she no longer could. There was a grace in her silence, an invitation for him to respond not as a businessman, but as a fellow human being. His phone buzzed, another calendar alert. His thumb hovered over the dismiss button, but he didn't look down. Instead, he set his phone aside, his focus narrowing to the card in his hands and the two strangers who had wandered into his life. The girl's voice, bright with hope and a little nervousness, filled the quiet. "My name's Lily. That's my mom, Sarah. We don't usually talk to strangers, but today is special." Her words settled over Jacob like a gentle snowfall, softening the edges of the morning. Sarah watched, quiet but not fearful, letting Lily speak for both of them. Jacob sensed her fatigue, the dark circles under her eyes, but also her unspoken strength. It struck him that she was allowing this moment of connection, risking the vulnerability of asking, no, accepting a little kindness from someone she had every reason to distrust. He cleared his throat, searching for something to say. "Thank you, Lily. It's wonderful. I haven't gotten a birthday card in a very long time." His voice sounded strange to his own ears, rusty, unsure, like it belonged to someone else. Lily beamed, her small hands wrapped around a chipped mug of cocoa. Mrs. Patterson, the cafe's owner, had brought over without being asked. "Sometimes wishes come true if someone listens," she said, her voice full of childish certainty. "Did you make a wish today?" The question landed with unexpected force. For a moment, Jacob was swept backward in time. He was a boy again, sitting at a kitchen table with a single candle and a day-old muffin, his mother's laughter echoing in the next room. But the memory flickered, and he was back in the cafe, the weight of the years pressing down on his shoulders. He shook his head slightly, looking away. "I don't really make wishes anymore." Lily nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "That's okay. I made one for you anyway." She smiled, a soft, lopsided grin that made Jacob's heart twist in his chest. He looked again at his watch. 8:24. Time was slipping away, but for the first time in years, he felt no urge to chase after it. The urge to leave, to return to the comfort of boardrooms and strategy sessions, faded as he watched Sarah and Lily savor their cocoa, their simple pleasure somehow more powerful than all the gifts he could buy. Jacob reached for his briefcase out of habit, but his hand stilled halfway. Instead, he took a breath and let the moment linger. Around them, the cafe slowly came to life. Other customers filtered in. The barista began stacking fresh pastries in the glass case, and the snow outside thickened, blanketing the city in hush. For a while, the three of them sat together in silence. Jacob found himself studying Sarah's hands, how she held Lily's fingers in hers, how she thanked Mrs. Patterson with a tired but genuine smile. He noticed the way Lily's boots barely touched the floor, the fraying edge of her scarf, the way her eyes sparkled despite everything. It was a small, ordinary moment, but to Jacob, it felt enormous. For the first time in years, he was fully present, not as a CEO, not as a ghost moving through his own life, but as a man who had just been handed a purple crayon drawing and the possibility of hope. The clock above the counter ticked toward 9, but Jacob didn't move. He glanced at the birthday card again, the three figures smiling up at him from a world made of snow and possibility. Lily leaned in, whispering as if she were sharing a secret meant only for him. "It's okay to wish. Sometimes the world listens when you really mean it." Jacob's facade wavered. He nodded, unable to speak. Something inside him, a cold, silent place he'd long believed permanent, shifted just a little. A fresh swirl of wind rattled the cafe's window, pressing more snow against the glass. But inside, warmth hummed in the form of steam rising from mugs, and the golden glow of morning light on polished tile. Jacob noticed everything now with sharpened senses. The soft leather of his gloves sat next to Sarah's chapped red fingers, raw from days braving Chicago's bitter winds. His cashmere coat, dark, immaculate, tailored to perfection, hung neatly behind him, while Sarah's threadbare jacket barely clung to her shoulders. Every detail stood out in quiet, aching contrast. And then there were Lily's sneakers, splotched with dirty slush, toes peeking out where the rubber had split, leaving wet marks on the floor. Jacob watched as Mrs. Patterson, the cafe owner, approached their table with practiced discretion. She set a warm croissant and extra mug of cocoa in front of Sarah, who blushed in embarrassment, but managed a tired smile of thanks. Mrs. Patterson, with her gentle, no-nonsense demeanor and silver hair pinned up in a loose bun, simply nodded and squeezed Sarah's shoulder, as if to say, "No explanations needed here." Lily coughed, a deep, rattling sound that cut through the cafe's comfort like a distant alarm bell. Heads turned for a moment, then quickly looked away, as if to avoid staring at someone else's hardship. The sound echoed in Jacob's chest, stark and unnatural among the clatter of cups and the rich smell of roasted beans. Sarah rubbed Lily's back, concern flickering across her face, but tried to soothe her daughter with soft words. "I'm okay, Mama," Lily whispered, voice hoarse but determined. "Just cold." Jacob's heart squeezed. He looked at his hands, broad, manicured, unmarked by want, and then through the window at his black town car, engine idling beneath a soft crust of snow. The luxury, once a badge of accomplishment, now felt almost shameful. What good was a fortress of wealth if it did nothing to keep out the cold for a little girl and her mother? He tried to offer comfort with money. He'd always been good at that. "If you need a place for the day, I can have my driver take you anywhere," he said, voice meant to be gentle but coming out stiff, almost apologetic. Sarah shook her head, eyes steady. "Thank you, but we just need to warm up. We'll be out of your way soon." Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes serious. "My wish was for a warm place to sleep, not a present, not even a toy. Just a place where Mama could sleep all night and not have to wake me up to keep walking." The simplicity of it, the gravity, struck Jacob like a blow to the chest. He looked down again, unable to meet Lily's eyes, shame burning in his cheeks. For years, he'd believed in the myth of the self-made man, that anyone could claw their way up if they only worked hard enough. But here, in this cafe, sitting across from a child with holes in her shoes and courage in her voice, he felt the lie unraveling. Money, his armor, his answer to every pain, suddenly seemed small and hollow. He found himself wishing he could offer more than a warm room or a taxi ride, wishing he could give them a world where wishes didn't have to be so modest, so necessary. Mrs. Patterson hovered, eyes bright with empathy. She refilled Sarah's mug without asking, slipping a paper bag with an extra sandwich onto the table. "On the house," she murmured, as if it was a secret just for them. Sarah mouthed a silent thank you, tears glistening briefly before she blinked them away. Lily, however, beamed, the first true smile Jacob had seen from her all morning. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching snowflakes chase each other down the window. Jacob found himself relaxing, shoulders dropping, breath deepening as he listened to the small human sounds of their presence. He realized, with a quiet shock, that he wanted them to stay. For the first time, the cafe did not feel like a fortress. It felt like the beginning of something softer, more uncertain, and infinitely more real. "Do you live around here?" Jacob asked, keeping his tone casual. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "Not anymore. We had to leave our place last month. I'm hoping for some work, but—" Her voice trailed off. "Sometimes it's just hard to keep up." Lily tugged her mother's sleeve as if to lend her courage. "But we're together," she added quietly. Jacob nodded, humbled by the simple strength in their bond. He reached for his wallet, intending to offer them some cash, but Sarah's gaze stopped him cold, a mix of pride and fatigue, unwilling to accept charity even now. He tucked the wallet away, frustrated and uncertain. He glanced again at the 3 stick figures on Lily's birthday card. He wondered how many times he'd walked past people like Sarah and Lily without seeing them at all. The silence was broken only by Lily's voice, softer now, almost reverent. "You don't have to help. You just have to listen." Jacob looked up, startled. For the first time he saw himself, not as the man who could fix everything, but as the man who needed to learn how to listen. The realization was humbling, and it settled into his bones. He reached for his phone out of habit, but this time he didn't check the time. He set it, face down, on the table. Would you let me buy you both breakfast?" he asked quietly. Sarah hesitated, glancing at her daughter, then nodded. "Thank you. That would be nice." Jacob flagged down Mrs. Patterson, who smiled knowingly and took their order. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, extra toast. Simple, hearty food that filled the table with warmth. For a few precious minutes, the 3 of them ate together, the gap between their worlds shrinking bite by bite. After breakfast, Lily pressed her cold hands to the ceramic mug, eyes closing in quiet contentment. "I wish it could always be like this," she whispered. Jacob swallowed hard, his own wish rising unspoken in his chest. As Sarah gathered their coats to leave, Mrs. Patterson slipped an extra pastry into Lily's hand, winking. "Don't forget, sometimes wishes do come true," she said softly. Jacob stood, pulling on his gloves, and held the door open for them. Outside, the city was nearly silent, the snowfall thick and dreamlike. Lily paused beside him, looking up with that same grave sincerity. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Jacob." Jacob's throat tightened. He nodded, unable to say more. He looked once more at the card Lily had made for him, the crayon snow falling over the 3 of them, together. For the first time in years, he felt not just the ache of loneliness, but the fragile beginning of hope. He didn't know it, but he was already planning his next move. Not as a savior, but as someone who wanted to walk beside them, wherever this road might lead. The sky outside the cafe had grown paler, the snow falling now in gentle, almost hypnotic waves, dusting everything in a hush that made the city feel suspended in time. Jacob stood by the cafe door, his heart pounding in his chest in a way he hadn't felt since his earliest days in business, back when every decision still felt like a risk, every connection an uncharted road. Sarah and Lily hesitated beside him, bracing for the cold. Lily's cough, sharp and persistent, lingered in the air. Jacob noticed the way Sarah's arm instinctively wrapped tighter around her daughter, drawing her in close, as if she could shield her from every hardship waiting just beyond the glass. Before Sarah could gather herself to go, Jacob reached for the scarf around his own neck, a rich, navy blue wool he'd bought in London on a business trip that now seemed a lifetime ago. Without a word, he bent and gently draped it over Lily's shoulders. The scarf was absurdly large on her, but she clung to it with both hands, smiling up at him in wonder. Sarah's lips parted in surprise. She looked at Jacob, searching his face for any hint of condescension or expectation, but he only offered a quiet nod. There was no transaction, no conditions, just an unspoken promise of warmth in a world that so often refused to give any. "Thank you, Mr. Jacob," Lily whispered, her voice muffled by the scarf. Jacob managed a small smile. "It looks better on you." He stepped out with them, waving down his driver and instructing him to take the day off. Sarah blinked at him, uncertain. "We'll just walk to the clinic," she began, but Jacob shook his head gently. "No, I'll come with you. Please, let me help." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time. Together, the three of them trudged through the snow toward a small urgent care office a few blocks away. The city, usually bustling and indifferent, now seemed to shrink around them, the falling snow creating a cocoon of silence. Lily coughed, her small body racked with each breath, but she tried to walk tall, determined not to slow anyone down. Inside the clinic, the waiting room was nearly empty, just the soft drone of a television playing the morning news and a nurse at the front desk, tapping away at her computer. Jacob filled out the forms, surprising Sarah with the speed and confidence of someone used to handling emergencies, and covered the costs with a swipe of his platinum card. When the nurse called Lily's name, Sarah started to rise, but Jacob stood too, quietly insisting on accompanying them. In the examination room, he watched as the doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a stethoscope worn from years of use, gently examined Lily, listening to her lungs, asking careful questions about their living situation. Sarah answered honestly, her voice trembling with fatigue and relief. "It's a chest cold, but she's been out in the weather too. Long," the doctor said at last, looking from Sarah to Jacob, then back again. "She needs warmth, rest, and a proper place to recover." Sarah's face crumpled just for a moment. Jacob saw it, the crushing weight of trying to be strong, always for someone else. He reached out, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, surprising himself as much as her. "We'll make sure she gets it," he promised softly. The words were simple, but to Sarah, they felt enormous. After picking up Lily's medicine at the pharmacy, Jacob called a cab and took them to a modest hotel he knew nearby. A quiet place with clean sheets and a cheerful manager who didn't ask questions. At the front desk, he paid for several nights in advance. Sarah protested at first, her pride flaring. "You've done more than enough. We can't accept." Jacob met her eyes, steady and sincere. "It's not charity, it's just the right thing to do. For Lily, for you." Sarah looked away, her shoulders trembling, but this time she did not refuse. Up in the room, Lily crawled under the covers, clutching the oversized scarf to her chest. Jacob sat beside the bed, watching as Sarah tucked her daughter in and set the bottle of cough syrup on the nightstand. The little room was plain but warm, the radiators clanking to life as snow continued to fall outside the window. Jacob pulled a chair closer, feeling oddly nervous. "Is there anything else I can do?" he asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "You've done more than anyone has in a long, long time." Lily's eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion and relief. She looked up at Jacob, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think my mom will smile again?" Jacob was stunned by the question, the innocence and gravity in her eyes. He blinked rapidly, a sudden fierce ache swelling in his chest. He'd spent so many years avoiding his own grief, his own longing, that the thought of someone asking for a smile, just a smile, felt like a revelation. He swallowed, unable to hide the shimmer of tears in his eyes. "I think she already has, Lily. She just doesn't know it yet." Lily smiled, closing her eyes and curling into Sarah's side. Sarah looked at Jacob, and for a moment, something passed between them. An understanding built not on grand gestures or promises, but on small, essential acts of care. Jacob rose to leave, but Sarah stopped him with a gentle touch on his sleeve. "Thank you. I mean it." He nodded, words catching in his throat. "If you need anything at all, call me, please." She nodded, her gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Back in the hallway, Jacob paused for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle over him. He looked down at his phone. Missed calls, dozens of emails, frantic messages from his assistant about the canceled meeting. He ignored them all. Instead, he allowed himself to stand in the quiet, feeling the strange, wonderful ache of having chosen, for once, to put someone else before himself. For the first time in years, his loneliness felt less absolute, broken by the simple act of caring and by the fragile trust that was slowly, quietly forming between them. He glanced back at the door, a faint smile on his lips, before heading out into the snowy evening, the city softer, gentler than he remembered. Over the next few days, Jacob offered them a room in his penthouse, just until Sarah could figure out the next step. Sarah hesitated, her pride fighting against her exhaustion, but Lily's soft, lingering cough made the choice for her. "Just for a little while," she'd said softly. But somehow, even in its quiet stillness, it already felt like home. Jacob Reed's penthouse had always been an exercise in restraint. Polished steel, clean glass, and muted tones that spoke of efficiency and order. For years, the only sound was the click of his shoes on marble or the distant hum of city traffic below. Now, as late winter sunlight spilled through panoramic windows, the atmosphere had shifted. On his usually pristine refrigerator door were 3 colorful crayon drawings, held up with gold-plated magnets, a crooked snowman, a bright red house with smoke curling from the chimney, and a family of 3 stick figures beneath a bright blue sky. The words, "My family," were scribbled, slightly uneven, in Lily's hand. He found himself pausing in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, drawn again and again to the riot of color on his fridge. It was as if these scraps of paper and wax had somehow warmed the entire place. In the living room, Sarah was helping Lily assemble a jigsaw puzzle, both of them cross-legged on the plush rug. Lily's laughter floated across the space, blending with the faint strains of children's music, now playing softly from the smart speakers. Music that had replaced the financial news updates Jacob used to rely on to fill the silence. It wasn't just the physical space that had changed. Jacob found himself changing too, in ways that surprised and unsettled him. At the office, he'd always been relentless, arriving first, leaving last, driving every conversation. Now, during a break between meetings, he caught himself opening his phone not for stock alerts, but to re-watch a shaky video Sarah had sent. Lily, propped up in bed, counting to 20 in a sing-song voice, beaming at the camera with shy pride. As he watched, Jacob smiled without thinking. For the first time in years, he realized, he was living for moments that had nothing to do with closing deals or building empires. Sometimes he'd narrate to himself, startled by the discovery. "For years, I built an empire of glass and steel. I never realized all I wanted was a home built from crayon drawings." The old routines fell away in small, almost invisible increments. Sarah started brewing his coffee in the mornings just the way he liked it. Black, no sugar, strong enough to bite. "Mrs. Patterson showed me," she'd explained one morning, sliding the mug across the counter with a half smile. The gesture was simple, but it pierced right through him. No one, not since his mother, had ever noticed how he took his coffee, let alone cared to get it right. Mrs. Patterson herself had become a near-constant presence, dropping by after cafe hours with a loaf of banana bread or a fresh pie for Lily. She never stayed long, just enough to share a gentle word with Sarah and a conspiratorial wink with Jacob. One evening, as she watched Lily and Sarah put together a puzzle, Mrs. Patterson leaned toward Jacob and murmured, "You know, it's never too late for a second chance, dear. Some folks don't get one at all." Her words echoed in Jacob's mind long after she left. Even his neighbors had started to notice the difference. In the elevator, one woman, usually frosty and reserved, smiled and nodded at Jacob, then knelt to compliment Lily's pink scarf. Lily, who had always been shy around strangers, grinned and showed her a new drawing. Jacob watched the exchange with quiet pride. Within the walls of the penthouse, the silence was no longer a prison. It was filled with the gentle chaos of family. The whir of the dishwasher as Sarah cleaned up after dinner. The splash of bath water as Lily played with her rubber duck. The sound of crayons scraping on paper and Lily's voice reading out loud to her mom. Jacob found himself lingering in the doorway to Lily's room at night, listening as Sarah sang a lullaby in a low, soothing voice. And still, a cautious hope grew between him and Sarah. Their conversations grew longer, no longer just polite exchanges, but shared memories, stories of old wounds and faded dreams. One evening, as snowflakes drifted outside, Sarah confessed, "I used to think the world was only what you could carry on your back. But Lily, she makes me believe there's more, if we're brave enough to reach for it." Jacob nodded, understanding more than she could know. "I used to think I'd already had my chance, that I missed it somewhere along the line. Now," he looked at Lily's sleeping form, her mouth open in perfect peace, her hands curled around his old scarf. "Now I'm not so sure." There were still hard days. Lily's cough would flare up sometimes, and fear would take root in Sarah's eyes. Bills arrived, sharp and urgent as winter wind. Jacob tried to help, careful to let Sarah accept only what she could, never making her feel small or beholden. They became a team, finding rhythm in shared responsibility. It was Mrs. Patterson who nudged Jacob one afternoon, as he lingered over coffee at the cafe. "You know, families come in all shapes, Jacob. But the good ones, they're built by people who show up for each other, again and again. No contracts, just care." The words rang true in a way that business advice never had. That night, Lily handed Jacob a new drawing. Herself, her mother, and Jacob holding hands, all smiling under a blazing sun. She beamed with pride. "It's us, my family," she said. Jacob's voice caught in his throat as he thanked her. Later, as he tucked Lily into bed, he realized he hadn't thought about his empty calendar or his bottom line all day. He was right where he belonged. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Jacob didn't dread the silence. It felt instead like a promise. That night, the promise was tested. Lily's cough deepened, each breath sharp and uneven, a low fever burning hot against her skin. Sarah sat beside her, wiping her forehead with trembling hands, worry clouding her eyes. Jacob knelt beside the bed, pressing his palm gently to Lily's cheek. "She's burning up," he whispered. Sarah met his gaze, and in that single look, they both knew what had to be done. Without another word, Jacob wrapped Lily in a warm blanket and lifted her into his arms. Her small head rested weakly against his shoulder, breaths shallow, fingers clutching at his shirt. Outside, the city was still dark, rain misting the streets. Jacob held her close as he hurried to the car, whispering, "Hang on, sweetheart. We're getting you help." And as the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, the car sped toward the hospital, a silent promise in motion. The world outside the hospital had faded into a blur of falling snow and blue-gray dawn. But inside Lily's room, time moved differently, slowed to the persistent beep of monitors and the uneven rise and fall of her small chest. The pediatric ward was still, the usual bustle muffled by the hush that descends when real fear seeps into every corner. Jacob sat at Lily's bedside, his hands knotted in his lap, posture rigid and unyielding even as his heart trembled. He'd shed his tailored jacket hours ago, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, as if removing layers might bring him closer to the trembling child cocooned in blankets. Sarah sat on the opposite side, elbows on her knees, fingers pressed to her temples as if she could will the fever to break. Her eyes were swollen from sleeplessness, hair pulled into a hasty knot, but she never left Lily's side, not even for a minute. Jacob would never forget the sound of Lily's cough worsening through the night, each spasm sharper, more ragged, until the nurse had come and pressed the call button for the doctor. The diagnosis was clear. The infection had settled deeper in Lily's lungs, dancing close to something more dangerous. Now, in the icy blue light of morning, the air was so thick with dread Jacob could barely breathe. The only movement was the gentle rise and fall of Sarah's shoulders and the occasional twitch of Lily's fingers beneath the blankets. They had stopped talking hours ago. Words felt pointless. All that remained was the electric thread of anxiety and the unspoken prayer that this was not the end. At some point, a nurse brought coffee and told them to rest. Neither of them touched the cups. Sarah gripped Lily's hand with desperate tenderness, her thumb tracing circles over the little girl's knuckles. Jacob hovered close, wanting to offer comfort but fearing to intrude, his presence wordless but absolute. The silence was finally broken not by Lily, but by Sarah. She stood abruptly, swaying, her face gone pale as paper. Jacob saw her knees start to buckle and caught her before she fell, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, lowering her gently into the plastic hospital chair. She tried to speak, but tears overwhelmed her. For a long moment, she sobbed into her hands, her body racked by fear and fatigue. Jacob knelt beside her, steady and strong, his hand bracing her back. "You're not alone, Sarah. I'm here," he murmured, the words as much a promise to himself as to her. There was nothing left of the cold executive, only a man desperate to shoulder some of her pain. The hours bled together. Outside, dawn bled slowly into a gray, snow-lit day. Jacob barely registered the passing time, lost in a fog of worry. He tried to remember every detail the doctor had shared, about oxygen, about rest, about the long, slow work of healing. But all that mattered was the little girl fighting to breathe. As afternoon drifted in, Lily's breathing eased a little. Jacob and Sarah took turns sitting at her side, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Jacob stroked her hair, told her about the snow piling up outside, about Mrs. Patterson's latest pie recipe. Sarah sang a quiet lullaby, voice cracking on the high notes, but never faltering in love. Then, just as the light outside began to shift to the pale gold of late day, Lily stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, lashes sticky with sleep. Jacob leaned in, heart in his throat. Sarah caught her breath, fingers trembling against the bedsheet. Lily's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then brightening with recognition as she saw her mother, and then Jacob. She tried to smile, lips dry and chapped. "Mama?" Her voice was weak, but it was enough. Sarah crumpled forward in relief, kissing Lily's forehead, whispering her name through a fresh wave of grateful tears. Jacob squeezed Lily's hand. "You scared us, kiddo," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. He meant to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. Lily blinked up at him. For a moment, she seemed to see right through every mask he'd ever worn. "You stayed," she whispered, with the wide-eyed honesty only children possess. "I made a wish for someone to stay." Jacob could not speak. His vision blurred as a single tear rolled slowly down his cheek. He let it fall, unashamed, the ache of fear and hope and fierce, unfamiliar love mingling in his chest. Lily's hand tightened around his. "You're my wish come true," she murmured, a secret meant for him alone. Sarah watched Jacob's face and saw something transform in that instant. A final barrier melting away, revealing a depth of feeling so raw and true she almost gasped. He was no longer just the man who had rescued them, not just a benefactor or a friend. He was, without ever intending to be, family. The realization filled Sarah with a strange, beautiful hope. She reached for Jacob's free hand, weaving her fingers through his, silent gratitude and promise passing between them. For the first time in a long time, none of them felt alone. As evening fell and Lily drifted back to sleep, the hospital room was filled with something new, a sense of belonging so fierce it felt like light breaking through the longest winter. Outside, snow still drifted down, but inside the world had changed. The first days after Lily's hospital stay felt like stepping into new territory. Every routine, every interaction, tinged with a hope so delicate it almost felt fragile. The spring snow melted slowly outside, trickling in thin silver streams along the curb, but inside Jacob's world, the thaw was unmistakable. The air was lighter, the silences softer, the laughter more frequent. Lily, though still pale and thin, recovered her spark quickly. She would spend hours sprawled on Jacob's living room rug, drawing pictures of sunny parks and bright houses with crayon-wielding fingers, the evidence of her presence growing with each taped-up masterpiece. The medical bills had been handled with Jacob's characteristic efficiency, but he was careful to let Sarah be the one to keep track of paperwork, to sign her own name, to hold her own dignity. Sarah, too, blossomed. She had always been resilient, but now that resilience bore the grace of someone finally allowed to exhale. For the first time in years, she could rest, knowing someone else was there to shoulder the load. She began searching for work in earnest, buoyed by Lily's recovery and Jacob's quiet support. One morning, as Jacob walked into the kitchen, he found her at the table in animated conversation with Mrs. Patterson over a laptop. Cover letter half written, resume open, laughter soft and warm. "You'd make a wonderful office manager," Mrs. Patterson insisted, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who'd seen generations grow up and move on. "Or you could run circles around half the staff at Jacob's Foundation." Sarah blushed, but smiled. She was finding her footing again, on her own terms, at her own pace. Jacob, for his part, felt a change that was as much about giving as receiving. He met with lawyers and realtors, his usually swift, transactional manner replaced with something gentler and more deliberate. He wanted Sarah and Lily to have a space that was truly theirs, not a guest room in his penthouse, not a hotel, but a home with windows that caught the morning light and walls that could bear Lily's art forever. The search became a project for all three. On rainy afternoons, they would tour small apartments and tidy duplexes, Lily skipping ahead to test every bedroom, evaluating each space by how much sunlight spilled onto the floor. Sarah evaluated kitchens, checking drawers for the smooth slide of well-kept wood. Jacob, surprisingly, found himself drawn not to the most luxurious options, but to the places that felt lived in, places where laughter would sound natural and late-night cocoa would taste just right. After a week, they found it, a modest, sun-filled apartment on the third floor of a brick building with creaky steps and a cheerful superintendent who gave Lily a peppermint and called her ma'am. The living room windows looked out on a tiny park. The walls were already painted a gentle yellow, the color of the first daffodils breaking through the last of the snow. On move-in day, the new home was alive with a bustle that Jacob realized he'd always longed for. He assembled Lily's bed, awkwardly at first, but with real pride, while Sarah arranged books and photos on the shelves, her hands steady and sure. Lily raced from room to room, shrieking with laughter, discovering a closet big enough for a secret clubhouse. In the kitchen, Sarah found a cracked mug left behind by the previous tenant. She held it up with a grin, declaring it her lucky cup. As dusk settled, Mrs. Patterson arrived carrying a warm apple pie, the crust fragrant and golden. She set it on the kitchen counter and was immediately enveloped in a hug from Lily, who declared, "It smells like home." Jacob watched the exchange with quiet joy, the scene imprinting itself on his memory as a promise of all that was yet to come. Dinner was a simple affair. Sandwiches, salad, slices of pie served on mismatched plates. They ate crowded around the small kitchen table, knees bumping, conversation tumbling over itself in bursts of laughter and shared stories. For the first time, Jacob felt the ache of old loneliness replaced by something gentle and persistent, a sense of belonging he never realized he was missing. After dinner, they all crowded onto the worn living room couch. Lily snuggled between Jacob and Sarah, her head heavy on Jacob's shoulder. The television played softly in the background, but no one really watched. Sarah leaned into Jacob, and for a long, contented moment, they sat in peace, the outside world a distant hum. As the night deepened, Lily turned her wide, searching eyes to Jacob. "Do you think we'll always have a home?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Jacob looked at Sarah, then at the crayon drawings already taped to the wall. He took Lily's hand in his and squeezed gently. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, voice steady with the kind of certainty that only comes from loving and being loved in return. Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude and hope. The city lights twinkled outside, casting gentle patterns on the walls. A new beginning written in laughter, promise, and the steady presence of a family that chose each other. Spring arrived in the city in small, careful steps. Grass poking through the last crust of dirty snow. Sunlight spilling through bare branches. The air finally carrying a hint of warmth. It was the kind of day that felt almost impossible after a long, hard winter. Blue sky, children's laughter drifting up from the park, and the distant scent of rain in the breeze. Jacob Reed watched from a bench beneath a budding maple, the gentle chaos of the park unfolding around him. Sarah sat close at his side, a novel resting open in her lap but unread, her gaze following Lily as she ran, her hair a dark, joyous blur among the other children. The three of them had come here every Saturday since moving into their new apartment, a ritual that had quickly become the anchor of their new life. Today, Lily was learning to fly a kite, a bright patchwork triangle bobbing and diving above the treetops, tethered to her in a way that made Jacob smile in spite of himself. "Think it'll reach the clouds?" Sarah asked, nudging him gently. "With her running, I wouldn't be surprised," Jacob replied, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there months before. He looked at Sarah and marveled at how natural it felt. This ease, this togetherness, the slow miracle of hope blooming in ordinary moments. Their life had settled into a gentle rhythm. Mornings were filled with the rush of breakfast and school lunches. Afternoons brought homework at the kitchen table, laughter echoing down the apartment hallway. Sarah had started working at the foundation's office, bringing the same quiet competence and warmth she had shown from their very first meeting. Jacob often found excuses to visit, bringing her coffee just the way she liked it, exchanging inside jokes that made the staff raise their eyebrows and smile. Lily had made friends easily, her laughter and stories infectious, her crayon drawings now pinned up in classrooms and hallways, each one a bright badge of belonging. Jacob sometimes wondered at the difference a home made, a real home, filled with messy shoes by the door and forgotten mugs on the windowsill, music and arguments and endless small kindnesses that stitched each day together. Evenings belonged to the three of them. Dinner together, sometimes joined by Mrs. Patterson, who had become more family than neighbor. Silly board games that Lily always seemed to win. Sarah reading out loud while Jacob assembled complicated Lego castles by Lily's request. Sometimes, late at night, Jacob would pause at Lily's bedroom door, watching her sleep, Sarah's hand resting on his shoulder. In those moments, the long ache of loneliness that had haunted him for years was replaced by a quiet certainty that he was right where he belonged. On this particular Saturday, as the sun slipped lower behind the city skyline, Sarah and Jacob packed up their picnic and called Lily back from the far end of the park. She came running, her cheeks flushed, the kite trailing behind her like a banner. Jacob scooped her up, spinning her once before setting her down in a fit of giggles. Back home, the evening unfolded in a haze of simple joys, the scent of garlic and rosemary drifting from the kitchen as Sarah cooked. Lily perched on a stool coloring a thank you card for Mrs. Patterson. Jacob assembling a vase of wildflowers Lily had picked on the walk back. They ate together, sharing stories about their week, laughter tumbling over one another until their sides ached. After dinner, they curled up on the couch, Jacob with an arm around Sarah, Lily nestled under his other arm, drowsy from the sun and fresh air. As night settled, the apartment glowed with a softness that seemed to come from within. Sarah tucked Lily into bed while Jacob straightened up, turning off lights and locking doors with a sense of contentment he never would have thought possible. When Sarah rejoined him, they sat quietly at the kitchen table, hands entwined, listening to the city's hum. Finally, Jacob slipped into Lily's room to say goodnight. She blinked up at him, her eyes heavy but shining. "Will you read me a story?" she asked, voice soft. Jacob smiled and sat on the edge of her bed, picking up the book they'd started the week before. A story about found families, courage, and second chances. He read in a low, gentle voice, and when he finished, he smoothed her hair back from her forehead. Lily caught his hand and squeezed it. "I'm glad I found you on your birthday, Jacob," she whispered, her words sleepy but true. Jacob felt a familiar, sweet ache in his chest. He swallowed, his voice thick with emotion, as he answered, "And I'm glad I finally made a wish." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, the gesture natural, unhurried. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching them both, her eyes bright with love and gratitude. For a long moment the world was still, just the hush of a city at peace, and the heartbeat of a home built, at last, on hope. As Jacob turned off the light, he looked back once more. Lily already asleep, Sarah waiting for him with a smile. He realized that the life he had built, one cautious act of kindness, one shared risk, one leap of faith at a time, had led him finally to everything he had ever needed. Outside, the city lights blinked on, and laughter floated up from the park. In their home, gentle voices and warmth filled every room, a quiet, unwavering promise that, no matter what, they would always have each other. And if you felt that lump in your throat, or a tear you couldn't hold back, go ahead and tap that like button. Every click helps us share more stories that matter. Stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Until we meet again, take care of your heart, be gentle with others, and never stop believing in kindness, love, and the beautiful gift of second chances. Still here, still hope. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.